I signed a form they handed me with a smile. I didn't realize I had just signed myself out of my own future. The moment I stepped off the elevator and into the 32nd floor of Mortec's headquarters, something felt off. It wasn't the building. The lobby still gleamed like a sterilized museum. The soft hum of climate control. The signature wall of quantum prototypes backlit with blue light. All familiar. But beneath it all, I felt something shift. A subtle tension in the air like static before a storm. 2 weeks. That's all it took. 2 weeks away at the International Quantum Systems Summit in Zurich. 2 weeks of presenting networking shaking hands with Nobel laureates and absorbing more praise than I ever felt comfortable with. When I left, my research had been the crown jewel of Mortec's next-gen division. When I returned, it was up for sale. IP transfer. Pending. 3 words. That's all. In the internal dashboard where I checked progress notes, calibration test logs, and lab schedules. There, it was like a sticky note slapped on a masterpiece. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. A placeholder. Maybe something the legal team put in by accident. I went straight to them. The head of legal, Miriam, barely looked up from her screen. Rachel, you signed off on it 2 weeks ago. No, I didn't. She turned her monitor toward me. Funding reallocation. Signed by Rachel Moore. That includes transfer of future revenue rights and authorship waivers on all quantum subsystem applications. I froze. My mind tried to scan back through the jet lag the cluttered week before I left. Forms shoved at me between meetings, Vanessa saying, "It's just procedural. Budget stuff. Nothing that affects your lab." The signature was mine. No doubt. But the understanding wasn't. I was blind. Blindsided. When someone celebrates your success louder than you do, they're probably packaging it for sale. That line. It floated up from somewhere. Dad. The last time I saw him before the summit, toasting my research breakthrough at the family dinner table with a glass of overly expensive wine. Vanessa beaming across the table like she was holding the patent herself. I remembered that night in sharp slivers, his speech too polished, her laughter a little too delayed. The way Jason, the IT tech who never usually attended family dinners, had been there offering to help streamline my access permissions before my trip. They had laid every piece like a chess game. My father, my sister, the people I had built my whole sense of trust around. They hadn't just taken my research. They had choreographed the theft with precision, and I had smiled through every step. I stormed through the executive floor like an invader, pushing past the pristine glass doors of the boardroom without knocking. Charles Moore didn't flinch. Vanessa sat beside him, legs crossed, flipping casually through a glossy quarterly report. Both of them looked up like I was late to a meeting they didn't invite me to. "You sold my research," I said, voice flat with disbelief. "You filed IP transfer forms under my name while I was out of the country." Charles set his Mont Blanc pen down with surgical calm. "We protected you from the legal burden, Rachel. You should be thanking us." That sentence struck harder than the betrayal itself. Vanessa didn't speak. Just watched me, cool, unreadable. There was something smug just behind her eyes, something that said, "We've already won." I left without another word. I didn't trust myself to stay in that room and not shatter something. Downstairs, I moved quickly through the central atrium toward the lab elevators. I wanted to get back to my console, to the core system I built line by line. If there was a way to undo this, it would start there. I swiped my badge at the elevator. The light blinked red. Confused, I tried again. Red. An error message lit up, access denied. My stomach dropped. I stepped back and tried the alternate lab entry near the data processing center. Same thing. I stared at the little badge in my hand. The same one that had let me into every system, every secure zone of Mortec for 6 years. Suddenly useless. The world around me continued like nothing had happened. Assistants chatted near the coffee bar. Engineers paced past me, focused on their tablets. No one saw what I saw. No one saw that I had just been erased. As Rachel leaves the room, her badge access to the lab fails for the first time. My grandmother always knew this day would come. She just didn't expect I'd need her from beyond the grave. The door creaked as I stepped into the east wing of the Moore estate, a part of the house I hadn't visited in years. Dust floated in lazy swirls lit by the slats of morning light slipping through the heavy drapes. Everything smelled like parchment and lavender. It was a room frozen in time. Eleanor Moore's private library. She always said this room was her sanctuary, the only place in the house where she didn't need to play the role of wife, matriarch, or silent observer to my father's empire. Here she was, just Eleanor. Reader, thinker, architect of long games. I crossed the Persian rug she loved and stopped at the massive oak desk by the window. Her notepad was still there, edges curled from time and ink faded. Beside it rested her fountain pen, the green enamel one with gold trim she never let anyone touch. For a moment, I half expected her to walk in behind me and scold me for tracking in dust. Rachel. I turned. Lydia stood in the doorway, her gloved hands holding a slim, cream-colored envelope. Her face, always unreadable, softened slightly. She told me to give this to you if it ever came to this. Lydia's voice caught on this like the word tasted bitter. I took the envelope with a trembling hand. Written in sharp script across the front. If Rachel is ever cast out, open this. I didn't speak, just nodded. Lydia stepped back and quietly closed the door behind her. I sat slowly, the weight of the chair matching the one in my chest. My fingers hovered for a moment before slicing the envelope open. Inside was a handwritten letter and a sheaf of stapled legal documents. The letter came first. My dearest Rachel, you've likely read this with shaking hands, and for that I'm sorry. I had hoped I was wrong. But I've lived too long among Moors not to see a betrayal before it arrives. You were always too pure for them. Too direct. That makes you dangerous in a house that thrives on misdirection. There is a clause in the Moortech family trust, silent, undisclosed, buried behind layers of legal shielding. I had it inserted when your father took over the board. If any Moore uses corporate instruments to unlawfully divest you of your original intellectual property, this clause activates. Control reverts to you if you can prove your claim. I stopped, eyes scanning the dense legal language that followed. The documents described a trust clause signed in 2005. Conditional reversion of ownership tied to Rachel's original work, specifically anything developed independently before Moortech's intervention. A requirement, physical time-stamped proof of authorship, either in the form of signed schematics, versioned code, or research journals. I exhaled, my hands clammy now. It wasn't a get-out-of-jail-free card. It was a backdoor. One I'd have to squeeze through carefully. She knew. Eleanor knew this would happen. I remembered her saying, "You can be a Moore by blood, but be careful when they start calling you a Moore in name only." It seemed metaphorical back then, a warning about identity. But now I saw it for what it was, a coded forecast of exile. I gathered the papers and pulled open the lower right drawer of her desk. Inside were keys I didn't recognize, one tagged basement and the other simply EM. I stood, heart racing. I knew what I had to check. The floorboards beneath the west wall had always creaked differently. When I was younger, I thought they were just old. Eleanor once joked, "Some boards hide better secrets than bookshelves." I knelt, tapped along the grain, and found it one board that lifted cleanly. Beneath it, a safe embedded into the floor. The EM key slid in like it belonged. Inside were 4 sealed tubes, a flash drive, and a small leather-bound notebook. I opened the notebook first. There it was. The original schematics. My equations written in my hand. Signatures at the bottom mine, and Noah Lynn's. Dated 18 months ago. Back then, we were still figuring out entangled fault tolerance in quantum mesh arrays. No company funding, no oversight, just two minds racing against the clock. I reached for the flash drive. It was labeled Substrate Model V.3.1, authored 2022. My naming convention. No doubt. It hit me all at once. Eleanor hadn't just believed in me, she had built a contingency plan, a legal logistical lifeline. While my father smiled and Vanessa poured wine, my grandmother was quietly placing guardrails around me. She had played a longer game than any of them. I flipped the letter over. There was one more line scribbled in haste, almost like an afterthought. Be careful with Vanessa. She's not just working for herself. That sentence chilled me more than the rest of the letter combined. Vanessa had always wanted control over the company, the family narrative, even how people remembered Eleanor after her death. But if she wasn't working alone, who was pulling her strings? And more importantly, why now? I stared at the files in my hand. I wasn't just fighting to reclaim my research anymore. I was unraveling something Eleanor had sensed long ago. The letter ends. Be careful with Vanessa. She's not just working for herself. You know you've been betrayed when your own family uses legal language to congratulate you. The boardroom hadn't changed since I was 10 years old. Same sleek walnut table, same polished skyline beyond the glass walls. Back then, I used to sit cross-legged in a chair too big for me, swinging my legs beneath the table while Eleanor whispered lessons into my ear between agenda points. Listen to how they talk about money, she once said. It's never about dollars, it's about control. Today, I walked into that same room wearing a black blazer I didn't remember owning and a pulse that wouldn't slow down. 10 pairs of eyes turned toward me, most of them bored. The same skyline watched through the windows, but this time it felt like judgment. Charles sat at the head of the table, fingers-laced eyes calm in that way only powerful men learn. Vanessa was beside him, ankle over knee, her perfectly tailored pantsuit as composed as her smile. Rachel, Charles said. Thank you for coming. Like it was a brunch invitation. I won't take much of your time, I began. My voice was steady, almost too steady. I'm here to formally contest the transfer of IP assets connected to my quantum research suite. The signature used was obtained under misrepresented conditions. The room didn't react. The legal advisor, a pale man with unreadable glasses, glanced at a folder and said, Rachel, your authorization was logged, time-stamped, and notarized in-house. You signed during an active funding cycle under Mortec protocols. Vanessa leaned forward, sliding a printed timeline across the table. You've been away for nearly 3 weeks. In that time, our team identified redundancies in your mesh processing models. I took the liberty of optimizing them. She looked at me as if she'd just done me a favor. Optimized, I echoed. You mean you rebranded my research after sidelining me and called it collaborative? Charles interjected smoothly. What matters is not the authorship of a single contributor, but the advancement of Mortec's mission. And your work, valuable as it is, exists within our infrastructure. The board agrees on that point. I turned to Agnes Byrne, the only board member Eleanor used to trust, or at least respect. Agnes's eyes were sharp but tired, her fingers fiddling with the edge of her notepad. When our eyes met, I saw something there that could have been regret or indifference. Agnes spoke softly. Rachel, I know this is difficult, but sometimes looking forward is more productive than dragging family into legal warfare. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, not from shame, never that, but from the sheer gall of it all. The casual way they wrapped betrayal in ribbons and called it business. I will be pursuing legal action. I said every syllable as deliberate as a metronome. I have grounds and I have documentation. If you think this ends in silence, you're mistaken. Vanessa's smile deepened. You can sue us with the money we gave you. Oh, wait, you didn't get that either, did you? The room didn't laugh. It didn't have to. The silence was its own brand of applause. I gathered my folder turned on my heel and pushed through the heavy glass door, determined not to let them see my hands shake. The hallway outside was quieter than I expected. I walked fast, head down, until I felt someone brush past my shoulder, an intern barely older than 20, carrying a clipboard and a sense of urgency that didn't match the rest of the floor. He slipped something into my hand without stopping. I kept walking, waiting until I turned the corner to glance down. A folded post-it note. Just 5 words, all capitalized. Don't use your office computer. They're watching. My blood ran cold. For the first time in this entire nightmare, I felt the shape of something else, a current running beneath the surface deeper than I realized. Someone on the inside wasn't just observing. They were trying to help. Or warn me. And if they were watching, what else had they already seen? The lab was supposed to be abandoned. But the dust didn't settle like it should have. Someone had been here recently. The warehouse stood at the edge of the Boston waterfront, where the cranes lifted rusting shipping containers and the gulls screeched over empty alleys. On paper, it was listed as a failed logistics startup. Eleanor had bought it under a shell company nearly 20 years ago, before Moortech even started developing its first quantum framework. I keyed in the passcode she'd once scribbled into the back of my old calculus book. 0819 EM, her birthday. The lock clicked, and I stepped into the dim interior, the metallic smell of dust and ozone greeting me like an old secret. Concrete floors, half-painted walls. The ghost of Eleanor's ambition lingered everywhere, dry erase schematics, still half-visible on boards, an old Moog synthesizer Eleanor used to explain quantum resonance, a server rack humming in the corner like it had never been turned off. She had been right. The real work is where they didn't bother to look. Noah arrived first. He ducked under the partially raised loading bay door, his backpack slung low and his hair longer than I remembered. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice low. "No," I said. "But we've been quiet too long." He stepped beside me, scanning the room with a kind of haunted reverence. "Eleanor always said you'd come back here one day." "She left me the key," I replied. One by one, the others trickled in. Aisha, still sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, dropped her coffee on a battered workstation and booted up the closest terminal like no time had passed. Marcus brought a duffel bag full of old hard drives and diagnostic tools, his silence comforting in its efficiency. And then there was Derek. Younger, slicker. Recently recruited into the Moortech development wing, though Noah had once told me he'd been pushing hard for Project Mobility. I invited him because I needed to look cooperative. I kept him because I needed to know who was listening. I turned to Noah when Derek wasn't looking. "Keep tabs. Don't confront, just observe." Noah nodded. He understood. Within an hour we had systems running. Eleanor's architecture was dated but elegant. We pulled archived builds of our substrate simulation and began recompiling from the last verified checkpoint, March 2022. The moment the system stabilized, I felt the weight of control settle back onto my shoulders. No more begging for access. No more walking into rooms where my name meant less than a quarterly report. This was my space again. Aisha was the first to find something. Rachel," she called from behind her monitor. "You're gonna want to see this." I walked over, leaning in as she pointed to a shared drive buried 4 layers deep in a cache labeled DevSync Old. A single file, PowerPoint, sloppily named VRP 3.5 mailers Dubai draft.tppx. I clicked it open. The slides were exactly what I feared. A pitch deck detailing the full scope of our quantum mesh platform scalability, resilience, monetization models. The target audience wasn't Moortech's board. It was a foreign tech investment group based in Dubai. The metadata confirmed it, last accessed 3 days ago. The author, tag V. Moore. Vanessa hadn't just sold the tech under Moortech. She had done what Charles never would have risked, pitched it internationally, illegally. This wasn't about internal maneuvering anymore. It wasn't about patents or sibling rivalry. This was corporate espionage with my work at the center. Noah came up behind me, face pale. "They're flipping it," he said. "They're not just stealing it, they're laundering it." I stared at the screen, watching the pitch cycle on autoplay filled with buzzwords and metrics she barely understood. There was a section about founder-led authenticity with my photo next to it, lifted from a press kit I'd never approved. Every frame was a lie built on my truth. My throat tightened. It was never about the science, I whispered. It was about how fast they could flip it. Some ghosts wear hoodies and carry USB sticks. The diner was the kind of place that hadn't changed in 40 years if it ever had. Sticky red vinyl booths, a jukebox that blinked more than it played, and a waitress who refilled your coffee whether you wanted it or not. Outside, the rain tapped gently on the window like it wanted in on the secret too. Jason Patel sat in the farthest booth, hunched over a chipped mug, wearing a hoodie 3 sizes too big. He looked like he'd been living underground, not just off-grid, but emotionally weathered. I slid into the seat across from him, Noah flanking my left with his laptop already open. No one said anything for a full 30 seconds. "You didn't bring anyone else?" Jason asked, eyes flicking toward the door. "No," I said. "Just us." He nodded, then reached into his backpack and pulled out a small dented hard drive. The old kind, no branding, no labels. His fingers were shaking slightly. "I almost didn't come," he muttered. "You know what they said when they fired me, that I was too curious about systems that didn't concern me. Nit. You ever hear that from a company that swore it valued transparency?" "I'm sorry," I said quietly. He glanced up at me. "Don't be. Just listen." Jason pulled a USB stick from his hoodie pocket and slid it toward Noah. "That's the bait. The real stuff's on here." He tapped the hard drive like it was a ticking clock. "But start with the surface-level sins. Let's warm up." Noah plugged in the USB and clicked through a set of anonymized server logs. My stomach turned as I watched timestamps and usernames flash across the screen. "These are from my lab system," I said. "These shouldn't even exist." "We wiped that terminal." Jason scoffed. "You wiped the interface, not the back-end shadow cache. Vanessa didn't know I'd built redundancy into the servers. You know, just in case someone tried to be clever." He leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. "She spoofed the admin account. Logged in using Charlie's credentials, but the pattern didn't match. Keyboard fingerprinting was off. Location metadata placed the login from her own condo." "Wait, you're saying she framed Charles?" Noah asked. "No," Jason said. "She covered herself using his access. Smart move. But I was watching because I didn't trust her. No one in IT did. She always asked for full permissions without using the chain of command." He pulled out a second USB stick. This one read, "Here, spyware logs. She installed monitoring tools on Rachel's lab machine weeks before the reallocation form incident. That form. It pinged a ghost server. She knew exactly what Rachel would sign and when." I sat back stunned. Vanessa hadn't just manipulated the situation, she had engineered it. Every signature, every access point, every illusion of protocol had been designed to fall into place like dominoes. Jason finally opened his backpack and pulled out the hard drive, a label barely visible in fading ink. "Restore point, MV2. Eleanor gave me this before she passed," he said quietly. "Said if anything ever happened to you, I'd know when to use it." I didn't then. I do now. I reached for the drive with hands that didn't feel like mine. What's on it? Everything. Her original time-stamped IP logs, quantum simulations, pre-commercial models, metadata on version control. It's all there, and provably older than anything on the Mortec servers. My breath caught. They think they sold my work, but they didn't even get the real version. Jason nodded, his eyes haunted. "They sold a ghost. You've got the body." That was the moment everything shifted. I wasn't clawing back scraps anymore, I was holding the original blueprint. The proof. The plan. The teeth. Vanessa had underestimated me. And now I had a wild card with shaky hands and a grudge against the system that burned him. I didn't know how long Jason would stay on my side, but tonight, he was mine. The game had officially changed. When you build something from scratch, you remember every flaw you had to work around. I saw mine in every stolen line. The hum of Eleanor's old lab had changed since we rebooted it. It no longer whispered secrets, it echoed them. The servers breathed like giants waking from a long coma, casting dim pulses across the walls, where formulas stretched like nervous systems. My whiteboard now carried layers of equations half written in my hand, half in Eleanor's generations of thought, converging under fluorescent lights. Jason sat cross-legged on the floor, two laptops open beside him, his hands moving faster than I could follow. He worked like someone who didn't trust chairs too exposed, too easy to fall from. Noah stood near the projection screen, his fingers stained with dry erase ink, while I combed through lines of code exported from Jason's hard drive. "This is your original build, right?" Jason asked, gesturing toward one screen. "Version 1.004, I said without hesitation. March 17, 2022. I remember because that's the week Eleanor made me scrap the whole tensor stack. Said I was solving a problem that didn't exist yet. Jason clicked. That stack's still here. But Vanessa's release candidate used a different layering sequence, less efficient but flashier in presentations. I narrowed my eyes at the diff window. He brought up side-by-side comparisons of two codebases. Every 10th line or so I spotted my own fingerprints. Workarounds. Inelegant, imperfect, but mine. "She didn't just copy this," I muttered. "She cloned it badly." "Worse," Noah added from behind me. "She scrubbed the change history. Made it look like she wrote the base layer from scratch." Aisha appeared from the adjoining office holding up her tablet. "That Dubai deck you found," she said. It had metadata tied to an outbound email log. Source address van. Moretechlabs.com. Time stamped 4 days before the board meeting. "She emailed the pitch before the IP transfer was finalized," I asked, already knowing the answer. Aisha nodded. She knew she had it in the bag. She sold it before the ink was dry. Jason kept digging. "There's more. Eleanor's backup system was designed to log every export made from this lab. Look here." He pointed to a string of hashed messages embedded deep in the code files. "What is that?" Noah asked, leaning in. "Encrypted watermarks," I whispered. "Eleanor told me once. If you don't sign your work, they'll forge the whole damn gallery." I isolated one of the encrypted strings and ran it through a decryption tool Eleanor had left behind in the system's root directory. The string resolved into a short plaintext line: RM V1.04 March 17, 2022. Auth EM, my initials, my version, and Eleanor's own embedded authorization tag. It hit me like a punch to the lungs. "I can prove it," I said aloud, barely hearing my own voice. "I can prove I built this before Vanessa even joined the team." Jason leaned back, exhaling. "That's what you needed, right? Legal-grade time-stamping?" I nodded. "This changes everything." The room went quiet. For the first time in days, the chaos receded just enough for clarity to take root. We had a foundation now. Not just rage and instinct, but evidence. Traceable forensics signed in digital stone. I walked to the back of the lab to grab my notes, letting the silence hang for a moment longer. As I passed the server room, something caught my eye. A USB stick plugged awkwardly into the diagnostics terminal, half concealed by a trailing network cable. I crouched, gently tugged it free, and read the label scratched into its side with a ballpoint pen. VRP, Merge Final, Internal Copy. Vanessa only. I stood there holding it like it was radioactive. The server room wasn't public. Only 4 of us had access, and I sure as hell hadn't seen Derek since lunch. I walked back into the lab and locked eyes with Noah. I think we found our mole. You don't need to burn the house down. You just light a match near the drapes and open the window. The ballroom shimmered with light and pretense, polished marble floors, wall-to-wall projection screens, quiet chatter muffled by the weight of secrecy and self-importance. It was the annual Cyberethics Summit in DC invite only, and the kind of place where billionaires made billion-dollar mistakes behind closed panels. I stood behind a glass podium wearing a black suit with no badge, no affiliation, and no name anyone would recognize, except 3 letters burned onto the first slide. RM Noah sat miles away, eyes glued to the stream monitoring feedback and facial reactions from our tight circle of known, more tech investors. The PowerPoint opened with a clean slide, nothing but white text against black. How innovation gets stolen, a case study in silence. I spoke softly at first, just loud enough to echo, but not enough to shake. A story I began about a young quantum scientist who developed a core simulation protocol for entangled systems. A story where that innovation was stripped, scrubbed, and sold by her own family. The audience was silent. Half leaned forward. The other half leaned back, already uncomfortable. She signed a form. They said it was about funding reallocation. What it really did was transfer control of her work into a trust she didn't know existed. And within weeks, her research was pitched to international buyers under someone else's name. I showed them timestamps, logs, redacted code excerpts, an export trail disguised as a company-wide update. I never said the word more tech. Never said Vanessa Moore. But I didn't have to. Insiders knew. This wasn't just a whisper in the dark, it was a flare shot across the bow of the world's most arrogant ship. The final slide, a redacted patent timeline with 2 signatures, one real, one forged. Noah's voice came into my earpiece just as I stepped off stage. You've got people texting me mid-panel. One investor's pulling out already. Vanessa's going to lose it. I didn't smile, but I didn't stop walking either. Backstage, I switched out of my blazer, slipped on a hoodie, and disappeared into the post-panel networking flood, like another ambitious coder angling for seed funding. By the time I hit the sidewalk, my phone buzzed. Vanessa. I let it ring twice before answering. You think this little stunt is going to save your career? Her voice was knife-sharp, shaking with forced calm. You're underestimating how little they care. No, I'm reminding them who really wrote the algorithm, I said, and reminding you that Eleanor never left me empty-handed. There was a pause. Just enough to tell me I'd landed a hit. I'll see you in court, she said. You'll see yourself first. I hung up before she could answer. The wind picked up along the avenue and the cold bit at my face. I found a quiet coffee shop 2 blocks from the venue and tucked myself into a booth by the window. Noah sent a photo of the MoreTech internal dashboard, red alerts firing off. Internal audit initiated. Archived logs flagged for deletion. Vanessa was cleaning house. She was nervous. My inbox pinged. Agnes Burns, subject well played. That was brave. Meet me tomorrow. Privately. I stared at the screen, pulse steady. If Agnes was reaching out, something had shifted. Maybe she remembered what it felt like to build something real, something fragile. The match had been lit. And someone somewhere had just opened the window. They built a fortress out of contracts. But they forgot who wrote the blueprints. The archives smelled like paper and defiance. Dust floated in lazy spirals, disturbed only by the shuffle of boxes being dragged from forgotten corners. Lydia wore gloves as she guided me through the chaos, her every step a memory traced across creaking floorboards. This was Eleanor's territory, she whispered. More dangerous than any lab she ever ran. I knelt beside a cabinet with a rusted lock and pried it open, revealing rows of leather-bound ledgers, parchment envelopes, and handwritten annotations on thick legal stationery. The Moore family estate had held its secrets for decades. Today, one of them was about to wake up. The folder was marked in faded ink amendments. Trust Revisions EM Legal 9.7. I opened it carefully. Inside a letter from Eleanor's personal attorney, long deceased, detailing a clause I'd never heard of before. Clause 9.7 Emergency Trusteeship Protocol. In the event of unauthorized sale, transfer, or exploitation of intellectual property developed by Moore family descendants, authority over affected corporate shares shall temporarily revert to an emergency trustee named herein. My eyes drifted to the last line. Designated Trustee Evelyn Moore. I exhaled slowly. My mother. Lydia didn't flinch. Eleanor never trusted Charles with full control. She buried safeguards wherever she could. I closed the folder and turned to her. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? Because I wasn't sure you'd survive long enough to use it. The light flickered as I pulled out my phone. I dialed Agnes. She picked up immediately. I was expecting you. I found something in Eleanor's archive, clause 9.7. It names my mother as emergency trustee if IP was misused. A pause. Then a sharp inhale. That clause was flagged years ago, but Charles claimed it had been nullified. It wasn't, I said. I have the original. Handwritten, dated, witnessed. Rachel, Agnes said carefully, if that's real, you can file a petition to trigger an emergency board session. Leadership would have to be reevaluated. Then I want that vote. You'll need Evelyn to support it. Officially. I hung up and stood in the doorway of the study where my mother sat as she always did, half in shadow and half in silence. I need your signature, I said. And I need your truth. Evelyn didn't move at first. Her tea sat untouched on the table beside her, the steam long faded. Charles convinced me to sign over temporary rights to my stake years ago, she said quietly. He said it was to consolidate the trust for tax efficiency. I didn't know he'd altered the filing. She reached for her glasses and looked me straight in the eye. I knew he'd erase you, just like he erased me. I placed the document in front of her. You don't need to fight for me, I said. Just let me fight. Her signature came without hesitation, a single motion, decisive. I watched her hand shake slightly as she capped the pen. Then she turned to me and said something I didn't expect, not from her. You have your grandmother's mind, Rachel, she murmured. But it's time you start using your mother's will. And just like that, I stopped being a scientist trying to win back my work. I became the rightful heir to Eleanor's legacy. And I was ready to make them pay for forgetting that. When they know they're losing, that's when they get mean. The first sign was the cameras. A dozen of them lined the front steps of Moortech by 9:00 a.m. lenses gleaming like weapons. Reporters jostled for position. Security guards whispered into earpieces. And then I saw the podium. Vanessa stood behind it in her signature navy blazer, pearls gleaming against the cold marble of the Moortech lobby. A full media backdrop framed her like royalty. I was still blocks away watching the stream on Noah's phone when the first words hit like a slap. We are deeply saddened to confirm that a former member of our R&D team, Rachel Moore, has been implicated in a series of unauthorized data breaches affecting not only company IP, but also critical infrastructure systems. I stopped walking. Effective immediately, Vanessa continued, voice smooth as glass. Ms. Moore is no longer affiliated with Moortech in any official capacity. We are cooperating with legal authorities and taking steps to protect our shareholders. The crowd murmured. The headlines started pinging instantly. Billion-dollar betrayal scientist accused of corporate sabotage. Moortech heir under investigation. Inside the building, my badge lit red. Again. Access denied. I pressed the intercom. Nothing. Not even the receptionist would meet my eye. Rachel, Noah whispered beside me. Your inbox is nuked. And hold on, your company drive access is gone too. It's like they ghosted you. I didn't reply. My eyes were locked on Vanessa, still speaking, still lying. Back at Eleanor's lab, the chaos escalated. Aisha was blocked from internal servers. Our backup environment flickered offline. Worse, Noah flagged a data sniffer running quietly on our isolated subnet. We traced it to Derek. He didn't even deny it. When confronted, he froze for only a moment before collapsing into a chair, face pale. She said she'd ruin me, he muttered. Said she had pictures. Stuff from college. Said I had to plant surveillance or she'd bury me. I stared at him, breath held. I didn't know she'd go this far, he added. I didn't know she'd torch you? I believed him. Barely. Then you'd better start undoing it, I said. Because you're going to testify. He nodded shakily. In a locked drawer inside the lab's legal files, I found something Eleanor had once written, a memo titled Disruption from Within Predictive Tactics. She'd laid it all out: the PR maneuver, the system lockouts, the sudden reversal of public perception. A chess move meant to crush a whistleblower before their next move. I uploaded it anonymously to the internal company archive. Then I shared it with Agnes. She called within the hour. Rachel, listen to me. You're not alone. A shareholder just leaked something. Vanessa wired $500,000 to a shell company, Dubai-based, matching the same timeline from the IP sale. My heart nearly stopped. You have proof? I asked. They do. I've seen it. It was the first true crack in Vanessa's armor. Later that night, as I stared at the blinking cursor on my quarantined laptop, a notification appeared. Encrypted file received EM sovereign backup. Vault sender unknown. No metadata, no signature. Just one line of text inside, you're not done yet. I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink. Whoever sent that file knew the game wasn't over. Neither did I. There's power in silence, especially when silence hides a kill switch. The room glowed with the low hum of red emergency lights casting shadows that stretched like bars across the floor. The ghost lab was quiet, eerily quiet, except for the rhythmic pulse of servers booting up in recovery mode. I sat in front of the terminal, Noah at my shoulder, Evelyn standing just behind us, arms crossed, as if bracing herself for a storm only she could see coming. The file blinked on the screen, EM sovereign backup. Vault. Noah adjusted his glasses. The encryption is old school, layered but personal. Whoever set this up wasn't worried about brute force. They wanted you to know the password. I closed my eyes. Eleanor had always left breadcrumbs, little riddles disguised as advice. Then it came to me, the phrase she whispered on my 16th birthday, when I'd nearly quit science after a failed experiment. Failure is proof you tried. I typed it in. The vault opened. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The archive unfurled into directories stacked with decades of files, time-stamped logs of every prototype, annotated equations in her neat handwriting, scanned patent drafts with her fountain pen signature bleeding into the margins. Even confidential correspondence emails between Eleanor and outside counsel lay preserved, frozen like fossils in amber. And there, in the root folder, a single document labeled Affidavit, Sovereign Inheritance. My hands shook as I opened it. Eleanor's declaration filled the screen, signed and notarized. I, Eleanor Margaret Moore, affirm that intellectual property generated under Rachel Moore's supervision and signature is the direct descendant of my funded initiative. Should any dispute arise, the Moore Family Trust acknowledges her as sole rightful heir. This clause supersedes corporate governance under emergency trusteeship protocols. I looked over my shoulder at Evelyn. Her face had drained of color. That's ironclad, Noah whispered, and then the screen flickered. A video file began to play automatically. Eleanor's face appeared older, thinner than I remembered in her final months, but her eyes burned with the same sharp fire that used to cut through every boardroom full of men who underestimated her. If you're seeing this, she said, voice calm but deliberate, it means the company has been compromised. They will lie. They will steal. They will even sell you out for a fraction of what you built. But this vault contains the truth. The patents, the drafts, The signatures they cannot erase what was born in your hands. Use these. Not to survive, Rachel. To win. Evelyn pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. Her shoulders shook as tears fell freely. She hadn't wept when Dad locked me out. She hadn't wept when Vanessa humiliated me before the board. But hearing Eleanor's voice again shattered something in her silence. I should have stood up years ago, Evelyn whispered. When he silenced me, when he erased me, I should have fought. I touched her arm. You can fight now. Her gaze hardened. Then I will. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything he made me sign, every deal he buried. I turned back to the screen, determination settling into my bones. We spent hours that night compiling every piece of the archive into a secure legal dossier. Noah worked quietly beside me, his fingers moving across the keyboard like a surgeon's scalpel, careful, precise, unstoppable. With each file logged, each timestamp confirmed, the weight shifted. For the first time, I wasn't clawing my way out of a trap. I was holding the detonator. The final upload finished just after midnight. I shut the lid of the laptop and leaned back, exhausted but wired with adrenaline. Evelyn wiped her tears, steadied her voice, and looked at me with a fire I had never seen in her before. They thought they sold your legacy for $3.5 million, she said. Let's show them what it's really worth. They called it an emergency meeting. They didn't know I was the emergency. The air in the boardroom was unusually heavy, as if the glass walls were holding in more than just sound. Charles sat at the head of the long walnut table, fingers steepled. Vanessa leaned back, 2 seats down, her posture relaxed, but the tap of her pen betrayed something less certain. The rest of the Mortec board watched Rachel with a mixture of curiosity and calculation. She walked in with only one item in hand, a slim encrypted drive wrapped in Eleanor's monogrammed handkerchief. She didn't sit. I'm invoking Clause 9.7 of the Mortec Trust, Rachel said calmly. And I request this board to enter emergency session protocol. There was silence, then rustling, then a low chuckle from Charles. You've read the archives, he said, voice silked with mock pride. I wondered how long it would take. Vanessa leaned forward, now lips curled just slightly. Clause 9.7 is a contingency fantasy, not a legitimate policy. No court would enforce it. Agnes Byrne cleared her throat. It's in the Trust Charter, page 148. If triggered with valid cause and supporting evidence, the board is required to hear the petitioner. She turned to Rachel. Do you have that? Rachel plugged in the drive. The screens lining the walls came alive. A looping video played, first grainy but clear, Eleanor's voice unmistakable. If you're watching this, it means something has gone terribly wrong, and someone is pretending they built something they didn't. There were murmurs. Even the younger board members leaned forward. Rachel let the video run only a minute before pausing. Then she brought up the folder's layered documents, patent drafts, date-stamped source code, internal memos between her and Eleanor, including an unredacted draft of the VRP initiative presentation. Each file opened to reveal her signature, each dated long before Vanessa's version had been logged. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Her hand stopped tapping. Rachel spoke again. You tried to bury my work under legal abstraction. You copied code you didn't understand. You presented versions of my research with my name scrubbed off. But the thing about research is, it remembers who touched it first. Charles stood now, voice firm. This is a spectacle. You think the board will throw away years of leadership over a petty squabble about signatures and prototypes? Not just signatures, said Evelyn, stepping into the room. There was a pause. She hadn't been expected. Charles froze, lips parted as if caught mid-word. Evelyn, composed and deliberate, took the open seat beside Agnes. I have something to say, she said. Years ago, I signed over temporary proxy rights to Charles Moore, my husband. I was told it was routine, an internal adjustment while I was undergoing treatment. She paused, eyes falling on Rachel. But it wasn't temporary. And it wasn't routine. A beat. I wasn't consulted when Rachel's work was moved. I wasn't told when her access was revoked. And I certainly didn't consent to the sale of our family's most promising invention to an unnamed offshore buyer. Evelyn lifted her hand and placed it gently over Rachel's. Agnes leaned forward, her voice sharp and clear. Charles, Vanessa, did you really think Eleanor didn't prepare for this? Charles looked like stone. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. Rachel reached for one final file. This is the affidavit signed by Eleanor, stored in her sovereign vault. It designates emergency authority of Mortec's IP should conditions of theft, coercion, or misrepresentation be met. The conditions have been met. This is the legal trigger. She looked at each board member, holding their gaze one by one. You tried to sell a legacy you didn't build. I'm here to take it back on record. The silence that followed was absolute. Then the rustling of papers, a murmured side conversation, the subtle sound of someone breathing too hard into their nose. Agnes looked around the table. We moved to vote. Rachel didn't sit. She didn't speak again. She just watched. Board vote begins, camera fades out before we see the result. The vote was 7-2. Not in their favor. It didn't feel like a victory at first. Just a void. The kind of silence that doesn't celebrate, it recalibrates. Charles didn't move. For a man who had spent his entire career commanding rooms, he now looked like furniture, carved expensive but suddenly irrelevant. His face held no emotion. Not anger. Not defeat. Just vacancy. Vanessa, on the other hand, was all heat. She sat bolt upright, eyes darting from Agnes to Evelyn to me, the muscles in her jaw flexing like she was chewing through metal. Effective immediately, Agnes said, her voice unshakable. Vanessa Moore is relieved of all interim executive duties. Mr. Charles Moore is hereby placed under suspension, pending a full internal investigation into fiduciary misconduct, and will have no access to internal systems or decision-making authority. Vanessa slammed her pen down hard enough to crack the lacquered finish of the boardroom table. You've made a mistake, she said, staring at Agnes but pointing at me. She doesn't understand what this company needs. She never did. Agnes replied without looking at her. Neither did you. That's why we're here. Security entered the room, not dramatically, not rushed, just present. Calm, polite, professional. A quiet signal that the era had changed. Charles stood, straightened his suit jacket, and left without a word. Vanessa took a few seconds longer. Her eyes found mine just before she rose. They were bloodshot, hollowed out by too many sleepless nights masked under perfect eyeliner. You're nothing without this family, she said. And now neither am I. She walked out. The moment she left, the whole room seemed to exhale. Agnes began issuing instructions fast and clipped to the transition team already waiting in an adjacent room. Passwords would be changed, files backed up, pending contracts frozen. Evelyn took a seat near the window and watched the skyline in silence. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The proof had spoken for me. Eleanor had spoken for me. The votes had been counted. My hands, once tied, now held every thread. Outside the boardroom, journalists swarmed the lobby. Agnes had prepared a short statement. I stood beside her, quiet, focused, while she read aloud that Mortec would begin a process of governance reform in light of significant internal misrepresentations. No names, no finger-pointing. Not yet. But the story had already broken. The leaked footage of the emergency session, the files, the pre-signed affidavit. It was all hitting the web in real time, and it hit hard. Our internal Slack channels were a flood of panicked emojis, deleted messages, and employees slapping BRB into their statuses while forwarding resumes. At least 4 major investors had already paused scheduled transfers. One sent a formal notice of intent to pursue litigation against the board for failure to disclose structural risk related to executive integrity. Translation: they wanted blood and refunds. I returned to the lab late that evening. Noah greeted me with a slow clap. Aisha brought out 2 cans of sparkling water like they were vintage champagne. Even Jason, now half out of hiding, sent a one-word message: respect. For a few minutes, we let ourselves feel it. The shift, the reclamation. But the celebration didn't last long. As I sat at Eleanor's old desk, a courier arrived at the entrance, leather briefcase, formal handshake, and a pale envelope with my name embossed across the seal. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Vanessa Moore, v. Rachel Moore. Civil action. Donaja 13428. Claim emotional damages, defamation, and unlawful surveillance. My fingers clenched around the letter, the edge biting into my palm. She was wounded. And now, she was going to be dangerous. A legal notification is delivered to Rachel Vanessa Moore, vs. Rachel Moore, civil action, Dacha 13428, claiming emotional damages and unlawful surveillance. The courtroom was quieter than I expected. Betrayal doesn't echo when no one is surprised. The carpet smelled like dust and varnish. Every surface in the courtroom looked polished, but it still felt like a place where ugly truths came to sit quietly and rot. I didn't expect a crowd. This wasn't some explosive corporate showdown. It was a civil hearing. Emergency calendar. Tish, technically closed session, but the internet didn't care about court rules. Outside people were already live tweeting updates before I'd even taken my seat. Vanessa sat across the aisle, flanked by two attorneys who looked like they'd been plucked from a reality show about courtroom fashion. She didn't look at me. Not once. Her eyes were fixed on her perfectly creased lapel, her expression carved from ceramic. The last time I saw her, she'd been spitting venom in the boardroom. Today, she was playing porcelain. Judge Reynolds was a wiry man with sharp glasses and no patience. He flipped through the motion packet like it bored him. "Let's proceed," he said. "Ms. Moore." Plaintiff Moore. Her lead counsel stood and cleared his throat like he was preparing for opera. "We contend that Rachel Moore, while acting as a disgruntled former employee, unlawfully surveilled Vanessa Moore's private digital activity and released defamatory content designed to inflict personal and professional harm." The judge raised an eyebrow. Defamatory content being the anonymous presentation at the DC Cybersecurity Conference, among other things. That was anonymized, wasn't it? Yes, Your Honor, but let's not stretch legal definition to fit moral injury. Continue. Vanessa finally looked up. She followed me. Online. Through company systems. She made me the villain of her little tech parable. I didn't flinch. I waited. Defense Judge Reynolds said, turning to me. I stood. "I have no desire to make my sister the villain of anything I began. I came here to tell the truth." What I presented at the conference was a real-world case study based on verifiable data. That data includes time-stamped research logs, signed trust clauses, and testimony from key witnesses. He nodded. Witnesses. Jason Patel stepped forward. Nervous but steady. His blazer looked like it hadn't been worn in years, and his hands shook slightly as he was sworn in. "I was terminated from Moretech after a breach incident I didn't cause," he said. "I was later able to prove that my credentials had been spoofed." "By whom?" the judge asked. He looked at Vanessa, then back to the bench. "Vanessa Moore." The court murmured, and one of Vanessa's lawyers leaned in to whisper, their confidence dimming. Jason continued describing the backup logs, the spoofed access, and the trail of digital breadcrumbs. He ended with the same line he'd whispered to me months ago. They thought they stole the work. But they didn't even get the real version. Then came the twist I hadn't planned. Derek Lynn walked into the courtroom unannounced, hands in pockets, unshaven, tired. "Excuse me, Your Honor," he said. "I wasn't subpoenaed, but I need to speak." Reynolds gave him a long look before nodding. Name and relevance: Derek Lynn, former Moretech contractor. "I was hired by Vanessa Moore to monitor Rachel's systems under the guise of server auditing. I installed surveillance tools on her terminal." Vanessa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Derek exhaled like dropping a boulder he'd been carrying for months. but I also saw what was happening. And before I quit, I left her a warning note. I've submitted my logs to the board and a third-party compliance agency. Reynolds leaned back, tapping his pen. I believe I've heard enough. He shuffled papers for effect, then looked squarely at Vanessa. This is not a defamation case. It is a deflection. Your claims are unsupported, your witnesses discredited, and your own digital trail damning. He tapped the bench. Motion to dismiss. I'm referring this matter to the State Bar for further review, particularly regarding the misuse of company systems and false allegations under oath. Vanessa stood, but the energy was gone. She looked smaller somehow, folded into her own shadow. I didn't gloat, I didn't smile. There was no room for victory in this space. Only quiet closure. I left the courtroom without speaking to her. The hallway was packed with press again, but they didn't see me at first. I moved past them like a shadow. I'd had enough of microphones and flashbulbs. That's when a woman approached me, mid-40s, dark green coat, discreet badge clipped under her scarf. We read your presentation under the pseudonym RM. We'd like to speak about funding your next project. Moretech voted to keep my name off their buildings. I voted to keep their names off my future. The invitation to the executive summit came embossed in silver. Rachel Moore, special session strategic transition vote. The words were clean, deliberate. Just like them. The conference room wasn't the boardroom. This one was smaller, quieter, designed for consensus, not combat. The table was glass this time, not walnut. Transparent. Someone must have thought that was clever. Agnes sat at the head, calm as ever. To her right, the transition board members shuffled papers with a quiet reverence, knowing history was being written in real time. Evelyn sat on the outer ring, not a power player anymore, but not removed either. She'd chosen her place neither in control nor in exile. Noah, Jason, and Aisha weren't technically invited, but they sat in the back with courtesy passes half hidden behind tall ferns and a tray of untouched bagels. I stepped into the room with no folders, no presentations, no defense to mount. Just a mind made up. We've reviewed the full scope of the sovereign vault, Agnes began, and the shareholders have expressed confidence in your leadership. The board is prepared to offer you full CEO appointment effective immediately. The room paused. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. I didn't. Thank you, I said, but no. A beat of silence, then the usual murmurs. Evelyn blinked slowly but said nothing. I was never building a company, I continued. I was building a system, a framework, something that worked regardless of who signed the checks or printed the letterhead. And right now, what this company needs isn't a Moore at the helm, it's a memory. Agnes narrowed her eyes but didn't interrupt. I propose that Moretech's IP portfolio, specifically those projects linked to my research, be partially divested into a new public foundation named after Eleanor Moore. More murmurs. One of the younger board members furrowed his brow. Divested. That's billions. Not divested for profit, I corrected. Redirected for purpose. The Eleanor Sovereign Fund would operate as an independent institute governed by scientists, engineers, and ethicists, not shareholders. I watched their eyes flick to one another. Legal counsel whispered into Agnes's ear. Evelyn looked down at her folded hands. The fund would hold voting influence on any future monetization or licensing of Moretech's AI and quantum products. No more blind sales. No more international flip deals behind closed doors. Agnes finally spoke. You're cutting the company out of its own future. No, I said. I'm giving it one. We spent the next hour carving out details, revising proposals, pulling in archived policies that hadn't been read since Eleanor first typed them up on a typewriter. At one point, Evelyn asked to speak. I formally resign all family-affiliated titles within Moretech, she said, her voice steady but soft. And I endorse the creation of the Eleanor Sovereign Fund. If the family name ever meant anything, it should mean stewardship, not seizure. They all looked at me after that. Even Agnes. especially Agnes. It wasn't just a vote. It was the end of one era and the beginning of another. I signed the memorandum near the close of day. There were no champagne flutes, no corporate handshakes, just a quiet file transfer, a few key press releases queued, and a massive structure lifted from my chest. They had tried to sell my work like stock. I gave it back its soul. I left before the applause started. Slipped out through a side hallway past security down an elevator that still smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and synthetic power. I ended up in my lab. The real one. Not the ghost version or the corporate clone, but the one I'd made after the wreckage when it was just whiteboards, wire, and a will to survive. The lights were low. Only the backup server hums kept the silence company. I pulled open the bottom drawer of Eleanor's old desk. Inside was the photo I'd kept hidden for months, her sitting on the beach, hair wild, a pad of notes in her lap, a look in her eyes that said, "This won't be easy, but it'll be worth it." I stared at the image, then leaned in. You were right to prepare for war. They thought it was about the money. It never was. The ghost lab didn't feel haunted anymore. Morning sun crept in through the narrow warehouse windows, catching dust in golden threads. What had once been concrete and shadows now held warmth. Shelves lined with equipment had been cleaned, labeled, made purposeful. The far wall bore a newly installed plaque. The Eleanor Sovereign Research Wing, for those who were never meant to wait for permission. Rachel stood beside it, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She wore no suit, no name tag, no armor. Just a charcoal blouse, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and a pendant around her neck, an old brass locket worn soft at the edges. Noah adjusted a mic nearby, then gave her a quiet nod. Only 15 people were present, half of them former lab partners, the others curious minds drawn by the promise of free science, free from investors, free from extraction, free from the Moors. Evelyn arrived quietly, arm looped with Lydia's. She stayed in the back, eyes red-rimmed but proud. She'd said little these last few weeks, letting action do her part, signing final documents, returning the last of Eleanor's journals, and stepping entirely out of the family spotlight. Rachel took the podium and exhaled. "We don't inherit legacy," she began. "We build it by choosing what to keep and what to let go." I kept the math. I let go of the name. A few heads dipped in understanding. Jason raised a cup of burnt coffee in quiet salute. "This isn't a lab funded by shareholders. It's funded by sovereignty, the kind you carve out when everyone else tries to box you in. Eleanor taught me that. Not in lectures, not in letters. In footnotes, in floor safes, in silence." She paused, then held up a folded page. "This was the last note I found. Hidden in the locket my mother gave me last week." Rachel unfolded it carefully. Her voice didn't crack, but the edges trembled. "You won't owe them an explanation, Rachel. Let them write history. You'll be the one writing code." She stepped down after that. No applause. Just stillness, the kind of quiet that settles only when something has been truly laid to rest. Later, she and Noah stood at the central table, the servers whirring like old friends around them. "I almost miss the chaos," he said. "You're the only person who would." Rachel smiled. On a whiteboard under the newly restored quantum schematic, a line of code blinked to life on screen. Noah ran a few simulations while Rachel outlined the next layer of encryption logic. They weren't rushing. For the first time in years, there was no deadline, just direction. "You know what we call it, right?" she said, capping her marker. Noah raised an eyebrow. "The Eleanor Rachel Protocol." Noah smiled. "Legacy and code." "Exactly." Later, as they shut things down for the day, Evelyn approached quietly, holding out the locket. "You were supposed to get this when you turned 30. Your grandmother thought she had more time." Rachel took it gently. She used the time she had better than most people do in a lifetime. They shared a look past resentment gone quiet, replaced by something close to peace. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but understanding. By nightfall, the lab was empty again, the kind of empty that feels earned. Rachel sat at her desk one last time that day, uploading the final white paper. She stared at the publish button for a moment before clicking it. The title blinked on the academic server: Quantum Sovereignty, the Eleanor Rachel Protocol, published under both names. A closing circle. She leaned back, eyes heavy, when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. Your research changed more than you think. Let's talk. Geneva, October.